Yes, so my name is Dr. Nicole Maccalla. I'm faculty at USC in the Rossier School of Education, so I teach research methodology and measurement. I also am one of the leadership members in Eaton Fire Residents United. So from the early days after the fire, we've been tracking indoor contamination in standing structures, so looking at things like lead and arsenic and chromium, asbestos, lithium, all kinds of things inside of homes. As you know, there were 100-mile-an-hour winds, and a lot of homes were inundated with toxic ash. So because of the urban fire, there's very unique, footprint to the ash that was deposited on our soil, our lands, as well as inside of our homes. And so Eaton Fire Residents United, we've spent a lot of time tracking the indoor contamination just to characterize it. For a living, I answer questions, so I'm kind of content neutral. My specialty is research methodology. So when there's a question that needs answering, I help figure out how we go about doing that in a valid and reliable way. And so what we've been doing is a major citizen science project looking at the indoor contamination as documented in industrial hygienist reports from homes. So these are professional tests and professional laboratories that have looked at this. And then we reflect it back to the community. So the idea here is community empowerment, right? Our knowledge allows us to understand the problems that we're facing, and everyone here is a problem solver, right? So we first need to characterize the problem to figure out good solutions for that problem. Throughout the course of last year, we also started moving into the outdoor contamination, looking at our soil, right? Because we have to think about our recovery in a very holistic way. We can't just address the indoors, we can't just address the outdoors, everything is interconnected, right? We can't just address one lot, our neighbor's lot, our entire community, right? We have churches, schools, businesses, homes, right? And everything is interconnected. We occupy all of these different spaces. And so thinking about a holistic community-wide approach to recovery, right? When I think about returning, rebuilding, and recovering, I like to put the word safe in front of that, right? So the safe return, the safe rebuild, the safe recovery. And the good news is there's a lot of amazing people that are tackling this problem, right? We have a lot of amazing community-based organizations and community leaders that have risen to this challenge. And so I think, when it comes to soil remediation, right, we have lots of different options, and we'll hear about that today. I'm part of the team that tracking this, right? Looking at effectiveness, looking at data, returning that to the community so that we can monitor what's working, what needs to be shifted and changed over time. And so we're in this for many, many years, right? So we need to set up the systems that we can track and learn about what's effective in addressing all of these contaminants, right? So some of it can be overwhelming. I'm not a soil scientist. I've learned a lot from my colleagues up here. It can be super overwhelming thinking about, like, how do I interpret my results, right? First, it's like, what do we test for, right? And a lot of the free testing that's been available to folks has been very limited in nature. And part of that is because these have been propped up and funded by philanthropy or higher education grants, right? So they're limited in what they can test and how they can test. These are not government, sort of organized activities. And so there's been a huge focus on documenting lead, right? And what we've learned even from documenting lead is that around half of the properties that have been tested are exceeding what is a safe threshold, right? A screening level that says, action is needed on this property. And what we've learned from the way that testing has been happening is that these are composite samples, meaning you go around your yard, right, and you pick up multiple, you spoon some dirt into a bag, and you are mixing, right, the soil from different parts of your lot. And so what what that means, if you imagine like bath water, right? You've got like hot water, you mix it with cold water, you get warm water, right? So when we have a composite sample, it's this average basically from the lot. And so when you come back with an average, and if you look at CAP LA, USC Clean, the LA County soil testing program, all of them are coming back with these composite results around 50% of properties, and give or take 5 percentage points. They're all pretty much similar. The two toxins that they're finding regularly are lead and arsenic, right? Other things come up frequently too, and our soil scientists here will tell you about that. But what that means is that when we've got about half of our properties coming back with lead that is exceeding, this threshold where action is needed, it means that there's probably hot spots on your property that are even higher, right? Because you mix hot, cold, you get medium, right? So we've got to think about really consulting with experts to come and figure out, where do we have these really hot spots on the property? Where do we really need to figure out these solutions, right? And another thing that I think can be overwhelming, as just a regular citizen, is these different thresholds, right? And so we'll hear today a little bit about thresholds, and when you, depending on who's analyzing the data, right, they're shaping the narrative, right? Everybody shapes the narrative. And so there's different thresholds, right? And some, we have a recent publication from the Department of Toxic Substances and Controls, right? And they've put out new communication around soil recovery after a fire. And they've established some of these screening thresholds, right? There's other thresholds from the EPA. There's other thresholds from Santa Susana Laboratory, right? There's all these different thresholds. And so as a citizen, you're like, well, which one do I believe, right? Which one is right for me? The way that I think about it is there's all different sort of safety screening levels, right? And if you think about speed limits, right? This is something we deal with every single day when you drive your car. When we're passing certain areas of town, like a school, we have a lower speed limit, right? When we get on a 2-lane highway, right, we might have a little bit higher speed limit. When we get on the freeway, the speed limit goes up. So what's considered quote unquote like a safe driving speed kind of varies depending on where you're driving, right? And where you're driving past, right? The context of that. So it's the same thing with soils. If you have children, or you're immunocompromised, or you're going to be actually, planting fruits and vegetables, you're going to want a lower screening limit, right? So just like that lower speed limit, you're going to want something a little bit more conservative. If you're not necessarily going to be using the land a lot, right? And you really just need to trap that contamination so that it's not spreading, you might go for a little bit of a higher screening limit, right? So think about it as empowerment. We have choices, and this stuff, we can figure out what is right for our families and our communities, but really in a holistic approach. So